Alright, guys. So, I did this wonderful little considerate video about showing each stage of polishing going from 400 to 800, or 600, 800, 1500, etc., and then onto the buffing wheel. And, kind of just not making you guys sit through the sanding process, but actually showing the difference in sheen and in polish between each individual stage of the process. Um, and then I realized as I was talking about it coming off the polishing wheel that I'd had my speakers plugged in the whole time, so none of it recorded with audio. So anyway, polishing's done. Um, Went with, since we had some machining marks on the plate, we started at 400 to work out most of the machining marks. I didn't go super detailed on this one because it's going in one of my builds. It's a customer build, a little bit different animal. It's kind of a pride thing when you're working for somebody else. You want to turn out the best product possible. But on this, we're just going functional, and then we went a step further to take it and put it on the buffing wheels, and we did a two-step polish there. So we went 400, take out most of the machining marks, then jumped to 600 to sand down most of our 400 marks. Then we jumped to about 1500 to kind of get everything nice, smooth, level, and start getting into that real high polish. And then, while for the most part, a lot of the time I will kind of stop at 1500 because it does put a good polish on there. For this video, I decided, you know what, for shits and giggles, let's go ahead and throw it on the buffing wheel. And on the buffing wheel, I will typically use a two-step rouge process or a polishing compound process. I usually start with a red polishing compound for a fairly heavy cut, especially if I'm working with steel or if I'm working with brass. Highly corroded brass, or rather rough brass, will take a red rouge, which it is a fairly heavy cut, and brass is a fairly soft metal, so you got to watch what you're working with. And then finishing off, cleaning everything off, cleaning the wheel, and finishing with a white polish or a white rouge for a good high fine grit polish. So, like I said, we've done all of that and wiping most of the fingerprints off. This is what we're left with. There we go. Nice mirror finish. And on the top as well. Gotta get the angle right. So, like I was talking about when we were talking about what grits we were going to start with and where we were going to move from there, with a 600 grit, how I was talking about jumping to a 1500 grit on occasion to double check where you're sanding, where you've gone too far, where you need to go a little further if you're holding it off center and whatnot. That's the same thing that really applies here. Given that we've gone to such a high polish now, any of that surface that is at the same level, the same polish, the same grit all the way across is going to come out as almost a mirror finish because everything is polished right there together. But getting to such a high polish here, you can really see the few, let's see if we can get a better shot there. There you go. Kind of the few little bits of the machining marks that are left. Now, some of this is smudge, some of this is from me dropping it, but you can see, while it does have a good mirror polish, and this is extremely smooth, you can see the remnants of where those machining marks were made in the first place. So that's the thing, is getting to this high of a grade of polish, everything that is at the same level comes out in relatively the same sheen. So you can really see where, if I was going for a 100% perfect mirror polish on this, you could see where we're lacking, where some of those machining marks are still in it, or where we may have overworked or underworked with a different grit. So, for me personally, this is more than enough. I'm really happy with this plate. I know going back together that it is going to be just really smooth. Now, that being said, there is a lot to be said for a really balls to the wall polishing job. You're talking a good few hours of work, but there's really nothing like taking a really crusty, or not necessarily even crusty, but an unpolished or unrefined plate and putting some effort into it and making just the absolute smoothest, butteriest, shiniest thing It's really satisfying. Joe has a fantastic article, kind of a zombie thread that popped up here, I don't know, earlier this week, something like that. But he has some great pictures of some work that he did. I think he's got a little bit of the detail on the jig that he used at the time. But anyway, it's super, super satisfying work to do. So, we've got that all polished up. We've got the sear relatively polished up. I'm going to put this frame back together. Oh, one more thing I did want to show. The face of this trigger plate I kept completely untouched, except, kind of by accident. So we can see, if you look at the finish on that and how much it reflects the light, and you can see how unrefined of a finish that is, how unpolished that is. And then we can compare to where we ended. So, just a bit of an example of what you can do with just a couple hours and a little bit of determination and sandpaper. So, I'm going to slap this all back together real quick. One other thing that I did want to cover, because we talked about it in a video, but I hadn't showed anything about it. This particular frame, when I started pulling everything apart, I noticed that I had some rust that came out with the trigger pin, or not the trigger pin, the sear pin. So I noticed there was a little bit of rust on the sear itself and whatnot, and if you actually look at the pin, you can see it's kind of crusty as well. So, an important part of this process is I took some Q-tips, pulled a bunch of cotton off the top of them so that they would slim down a little bit, rolled them in alcohol, and ran through the pivot pin hole on both sides, scrubbing it till everything came out clean. Took some Q-tips, ran down the inside of the frame, scrubbed everything out there. The tops of both of the set screws are brass, and so I've taken and kind of polished those to about 1500. And then I've also added I'm trying something new. I've started melting and adding a little bit of plastic to the threads on set screws in here, just because it's always cold in my basement and I'm really tired of fighting with my Loctite for not setting up correctly. So, like I said, that's pretty much everything that went on in this frame. I'm going to put everything back together, make a couple of adjustments, and hopefully within the next few days get to trying to put this project together, figuring out what I still need. As always, guys, if there's any kind of questions that you have, if you want something a little more detailed, or if I am just blabbering on a little too much, just let me know. See you next time.